There may not be a national team in world football more addicted to breaking its own country's heart than England national football team. Every few years, the cycle repeats itself. A new generation appears. The hype grows larger than ever. The media starts calling them special. Fans begin to believe football is finally coming home, and then somehow, everything falls apart again. Euro 2024 felt like the perfect example. Jude Bellingham looked destined to become the face of football. Phil Foden was coming off the best season of his career. Bukayo Saka kept delivering in the biggest moments. Cole Palmer exploded into superstardom. And somehow, even with all that talent, England still left the tournament with the same feeling they have carried for decades: regret, pressure, disappointment. But now something feels different heading into World Cup 2026. The hype is fading. The fear around England is disappearing. For the first time in years, people are no longer treating them like the future kings of football. And strangely enough, that might be exactly what makes this version of England so dangerous. When Thomas Tuchel arrived, the first thing he changed was not the tactics. It was the feeling around the team. Suddenly, this did not look like the glamorous England project people had spent years building up. Some of the biggest names in English football no longer felt untouchable. Phil Foden, once viewed as the future Ballon d'Or winner of this generation, was no longer guaranteed to be the center of everything. Cole Palmer, the player many fans believed should become the new face of England after Euro 2024, was suddenly surrounded by uncertainty instead of hype. Even Trent Alexander-Arnold, after making one of the biggest moves in world football, no longer looked essential to England's future plans. And that shocked people. Because for years, England built teams based on excitement, reputation, and the fantasy of a new golden generation finally changing history. But Tuchel does not seem interested in building celebrities. He wants control, intensity, discipline, players willing to suffer without the ball, players capable of surviving tournament football when pressure becomes unbearable. That is why this England team suddenly feels colder, more ruthless, less beautiful, maybe, but also far more dangerous. Because underneath all the noise that disappeared after Euro 2024, the core of this squad is still terrifying. Harry Kane remains one of the deadliest strikers in the world. Declan Rice is entering the absolute prime of his career. And Jude Bellingham is no longer just a wonder kid anymore. The problem with England national football team did not begin with this generation, or the one before it. In many ways, it began the moment the country convinced itself that football belonged to them forever. England created the sport. They hosted the first international match in football history. And after winning the 1966 World Cup on home soil, an entire nation started believing that England should naturally dominate world football. That expectation never disappeared. It only became heavier with time. Every generation inherited it. Every player carried it. Every tournament became more than football. It became a national obsession, and slowly, that pressure started destroying England from the inside. The failures became impossible to ignore. In 1950, England suffered one of the most humiliating defeats in football history against the United States. Decades later came more embarrassment. Euro 1988 ended in disaster. Tournament after tournament, England walked into competitions carrying the arrogance of a giant but leaving with the trauma of a broken team. And the worst part was not even the defeats themselves. It was the reaction that followed them. English newspapers destroyed players after every collapse. Fans treated every tournament like the beginning of destiny, only to watch another dream die under unbearable pressure. The England shirt slowly became heavier than almost any shirt in world football, because unlike other countries, England never simply wanted to compete. They believed they were supposed to rule football itself. And eventually, that pressure created something even more dangerous than failure. It created fear. Fear of making mistakes. Fear of disappointing the country. Fear of becoming the next player blamed for another national heartbreak. But then, one generation arrived that seemed too talented to fail. By the early 2000s, England genuinely believed the nightmare was finally over. This was not just another talented squad. This was supposed to be the generation that restored England to the top of world football. David Beckham was one of the most famous athletes on the planet. Steven Gerrard and Frank Lampard dominated the Premier League. Wayne Rooney looked like football's next global superstar. Rio Ferdinand, John Terry, Michael Owen. Everywhere you looked, England had world-class players. The media called them the Golden Generation. Fans treated them like inevitable world champions. And that was exactly when the pressure became unbearable, because suddenly, England were no longer just expected to compete. They were expected to conquer football. Every tournament became a national mission. Every mistake became front-page humiliation. Every poor performance felt like betrayal. Instead of freedom, the players carried fear. Fear of failing their country. Fear of becoming the next scapegoat. Fear of not living up to the impossible fantasy built around them. And slowly, something strange started happening. The more talent England had, the tighter they played. The heavier they looked, the less natural their football became. On paper, they looked unstoppable, but mentally, they were collapsing long before the matches even ended. And then came the heartbreaks that completely shattered England's belief in itself. What followed was not just failure. It was years of emotional collapse repeated over and over again in front of the entire world. Euro 2004 felt like the beginning of the curse becoming real. Wayne Rooney was destroying defenders and looked unstoppable. But the moment he got injured against Portugal national football team, the entire energy of England disappeared. Another penalty shootout followed, another heartbreak. 2 years later, the nightmare returned. The 2006 World Cup was supposed to be England's moment. Most of the golden generation had entered their prime. The expectations inside the country became insane. But instead of looking fearless, England looked terrified of making mistakes. Then came the image that still haunts English football. Rooney losing control. The red card against Portugal. Another quarter-final exit. Another penalty defeat. Another generation collapsing under pressure. And the disasters kept getting worse. In 2010, Germany national football team humiliated England 4-1, one of the darkest nights in modern English football history. 4 years later, England crashed out at the group stage of the World Cup. Then came Iceland in 2016, a defeat so embarrassing that it felt almost impossible to explain. Millions of fans watched in disbelief as one of football's richest and most powerful nations collapsed against a country with a population smaller than many English cities. By this point, the fear surrounding England had become psychological. Every tournament started to feel the same. Hope, hype, pressure, collapse. Again and again. And eventually, something unexpected happened. The entire country stopped believing in them. By the time Gareth Southgate took over, the atmosphere around England national football team had completely changed. For the first time in decades, there was almost no arrogance left. No one was calling this squad the best in the world. No one believed England were destined to dominate international football. In fact, many fans expected disappointment before tournaments even began. And strangely enough, that was exactly when England started playing their best football again. The 2018 World Cup arrived with almost no pressure compared to previous generations. This was not Beckham, Gerrard, Lampard, and Rooney anymore. This was a younger, less glamorous group led by a manager many people initially doubted. But without the crushing weight of expectation, England suddenly looked free. They reached the World Cup semifinals for the first time since 1990. Then came Euro 2021. Once again, England were not viewed as overwhelming favorites early in the tournament. They played with discipline, calmness, unity. They defeated Germany national football team in a major tournament for the first time in decades and reached another final. And slowly, people began noticing the pattern that had followed England for generations. Whenever the pressure disappeared, England became dangerous. Whenever the country stopped demanding perfection, the players finally looked alive. But success created belief again. And belief, historically, has always been the most dangerous thing for England, because Euro 2024 would bring all the pressure back. By the time Euro 2024 arrived, the entire mood around England national football team had changed again. The pressure was back, and this time, it felt bigger than ever. Jude Bellingham looked like the future face of world football after dominating Europe with Real Madrid CF. Phil Foden had just produced the best season of his career. Bukayo Saka kept delivering in huge moments. Cole Palmer exploded into superstardom almost overnight. On paper, this looked like the most talented England team in years, maybe decades. And once again, the country started dreaming too loudly. But throughout the tournament, England never truly looked comfortable. Every knockout game felt like survival instead of domination. Moments of brilliance kept rescuing them from disaster. Bellingham's bicycle kick, Saka's equalizer, Watkins saving them late. Again and again, individual magic dragged England forward, while the pressure around the team kept growing heavier. Even when they reached the final, something still felt wrong. The football looked tense, nervous, restricted. It felt like England were carrying the fear of every previous generation on their shoulders. And when the dream collapsed once more, the country finally realized something had to change. Because another golden generation had just discovered the same painful truth England always learns eventually. Talent alone changes nothing. That is why the arrival of Thomas Tuchel feels so important. Because unlike previous England managers, Tuchel does not seem interested in protecting reputations or feeding the country's obsession with star power. He understands something most people around England never fully accepted. Tournament football is not won by hype. It is won by control, discipline, mentality, the ability to survive pressure when everything around you becomes chaotic. And slowly, England started changing. The team became more physical, more aggressive without the ball, more structured defensively. Tuchel began prioritizing players capable of suffering for the system instead of simply producing beautiful moments on social media. That is why some of England's biggest names suddenly no longer looked untouchable. The message became clear very quickly. Nobody is guaranteed a place anymore. Not because Tuchel dislikes talent, but because he knows talent alone has never saved England before. And underneath all the tactical changes, something even more important started happening psychologically. England stopped trying to look like the most entertaining team in the world. They started looking like a team built for war. Harry Kane still gives them world-class finishing and leadership. Declan Rice controls games with authority. Jude Bellingham now plays with the maturity of a player far older than his age. And around them, a new generation has emerged with less ego, less glamour, but maybe the exact mentality England always needed. For the first time in years, this team no longer feels obsessed with being loved. And that might completely change what happens at World Cup 2026. For the first time in a very long time, England national football team are heading into a major tournament without feeling like the center of the football world. The spotlight has shifted elsewhere. Spain national football team are being called the future of football. France national football team still look terrifying on paper. Brazil national football team are rebuilding excitement again. Even countries like Portugal national football team and Argentina national football team seem to attract more emotional attention heading into World Cup 2026. And maybe that is exactly what England needed. Because for decades, England walked into tournaments carrying the impossible burden of proving they were football royalty. Every generation was expected to save the nation. Every young superstar became the next chosen one. But now, something feels calmer, more dangerous. Harry Kane is approaching what could realistically be his final World Cup in his prime years. And he looks more complete than ever as a leader. Declan Rice has evolved into one of the best midfield controllers in world football. Jude Bellingham is no longer playing like a talented kid. He now looks like a player capable of carrying enormous moments without fear. Around them, players like Marcus Rashford, Anthony Gordon, and Morgan Rogers bring something England often lacked in previous generations: hunger, directness, ruthlessness. This team no longer feels built to entertain the world. It feels built to survive it. And historically, that is when England become the most dangerous version of themselves. Maybe the strangest thing about England national football team is that they have never truly struggled with talent. Generation after generation, England have produced world-class players, superstars, icons, some of the biggest names football has ever seen. And yet, for decades, they kept collapsing under the same unbearable weight: the pressure, the expectations, the obsession of an entire country desperate to relive 1966. But World Cup 2026 feels different. Not because England suddenly became perfect, not because the curse magically disappeared, and not because people finally believe this team is unbeatable. In fact, it feels different for the opposite reason. For once, England are not entering the tournament as football's chosen saviors. They are not the glamorous golden generation everyone expects to dominate. The spotlight is finally somewhere else. And maybe that freedom changes everything, because history has already shown something terrifying about England. When the pressure becomes too heavy, they collapse. But when the world stops believing in them, they become dangerous again. Maybe Thomas Tuchel understands that better than anyone. Maybe this team was never meant to carry football's crown on its head. Maybe it was built to hunt in the shadows instead. And if that is true, then World Cup 2026 may be underestimating one of the most dangerous teams in international football.